Hello, I'm Mara Purl, and this is Novel Conversations. Today I'm talking with two wonderful friends, David Acuff and Steve Truitt. We've had a previous conversation mostly about science fiction, as both of my friends are fantastic, best-selling, award-winning sci-fi authors. And so we're going to do conversation number two. So, Dave, would you start off by introducing yourself?
Certainly. Thank you, Marge. Great to be here and good to see everybody again. This is always kind of fun to play catch up a little bit. But yeah, so I'm David Acuff. I'm in Los Angeles and I'm a filmmaker out here, have been for about 10 years. Was a Disney editor for 7 years and then now full-time freelance and have got 7 novels out on Amazon to my name, two of which are sci-fi novels. So the last one was Battle Tide. So that was my big one that has been taking 10 years to write. So finally pushed it out onto the market in May. So that's been kind of a fun progression. So.
Awesome. Yeah, very exciting. So, and Steve, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be back. I'm Steve Truitt. I started in television 25, 30 years ago as a news reporter and a host, shows on National Geographic Channel and Discovery Channel and even HGTV. And I had a nice long television career and then transitioned into coaching and training, which really allowed me to find the time to do my passion, which is writing. And I love science fiction. I've been a fan forever. I'm as old as Star Trek, so I'm, aligned myself with Star Trek. I've been lucky to meet with a lot of people from that world and even be a part of a show. And I just decided it was time for me to start writing my own sci-fi novels. So I started my first book series called the Mindset Chronicles. Book one came out about a year and a half ago called The Deletion. And then the second book, The Spill, just came out last April. And I'm currently working on the third and final Mindset Chronicles book called The Benevolent.
So
Nice.
exciting. Yeah, so all three of us are based in Los Angeles, and
Mhm.
all three of us have big connections to the entertainment business. I was an actress on Days of Our Lives and a lot of other television projects. I was screen tested for Star Trek 3 and had the pleasure of knowing Gene Roddenberry and brainstorming this character actually with him. And so I also, although I have not yet released any science fiction work myself, I also am a longtime fan. And I'm writing a series that's in the women's fiction genre, and I have 12 books in the series so far, and a new one coming out this coming fall. So we're all in the series world too, which is a sort of interesting discipline of its own. I wanted to just start off by talking with both of you about writing. I know a lot of our followers are fellow writers. So, first of all, how is writing book two different from writing book one, if either of you want to start?
Mm.
David,
Well,
you come first alphabetically if you want to go
Oh,
first.
great.
If you want to acquiesce, I'm happy to do
Very
that.
Perfect.
good.
So I'm in the very early stages of the book two for Battle Tides. And so, I when I was getting to the end of book one and putting out all my post-it notes and make sure I had gotten everything I wanted in there and what wasn't going to fit in there, I created a whole new stack of post-it notes that were all we're saving this for book two. We're kicking this to book two. And
Yeah.
so there was a bunch of writing the first one was a lot about two, leaving yourself some of those little dangling participles. It's like, this isn't gonna end it here. We're just gonna introduce this little thing here, or this people, or this item. And then, but it'll pay off in the second one. So leaving yourself some of those little dangling things to those threads to be able to start pulling and unspooling those in the second novel. But the liberty of having the world building for the first one is now intact. Some of those things I was playing with and going back and should it be like this? Should it be like that? There was a lot of that going on, but now, the worlds and the rules of the world are all in place. So now it's a matter of, kind of fleshing that out in the second one, but I don't have to rediscover some of those portions. So the next book will not take 12 years to write because yes. So
Yeah, you've built your world,
yes.
which is huge, just huge. Yeah. What would you say, Steve?
Well, I'm a relatively new novelist. I just started a couple of years ago. Actually, it was COVID that got me into it, finally gave me that permission to do it. And I was struggling with the first book because I wanted to write an epic, a one-off book. And I had the whole idea fleshed out beginning to end. And I was getting to the point where I'd already written 70,000 words and I wasn't even really getting to where I wanted to go.
Wow.
And I'm not one for cutting a lot of the stuff I write, simply because I feel like I work it out in my head first. And then by the time it gets to paper, I don't need much editing or cutting. So I decided to split it into two and leave a cliffhanger at the beginning, or rather at the end of the first one. And that, like David said, I had a whole bunch of stuff left over that I hadn't even written yet. And it took me, I think, a year to write the first book. It took me 3 months to write the next one because I just already had it set up. Now, David, you write in Post-it notes and stuff like that. I tend to use Scrivener, and I put everything into the little sections that are offered over on the left margin where you can organize everything and get it there. So yeah, book two just kind of came out, and it came to a natural conclusion, the one that I wanted for the entire idea. But then I also knew that there was more story to tell. I had another book I wanted to write, and instead I decided to make that the third book in the series. It's a bit of a departure from the story, but it actually makes perfect sense. I've been able to weave it backwards into the first two books. And just that process of discovering that and still telling the same story, but telling a different story, has been fascinating. And I've been enjoying writing book three, I think, more than I liked writing the first two.
Oh, what a great journey.
That's
Boy,
awesome.
yeah. Well, as you both know, my novels began as scripts.
Yeah.
In the regular world, it's a script first, and then it gets adapted, or excuse me, it's a book first, and then it gets adapted into scripts. But I went the other way. So it was a radio drama, and it was 100 episodes and a lot of characters. And so how was this whole world going to be adapted to become books? Well, it wasn't going to be 100 books for sure. And I had to find logical themes for each novel because I didn't want it just to be an arbitrary, okay, we're going to cut here, and that's book one, and we're going to cut here, and that's book two. I wanted there to be reasons for it. Turns out it's a pentalogy. It's 5 novels for my series, but then there are novellas and novelettes that expand certain elements. My protagonist is a painter. She paints wildlife, and she goes off on adventures to do research for her wildlife. And those quite handily stand alone. So people who are reading the core novels don't have to read those, but it certainly enhances that character. And then conversely, I have some people who don't want to engage in the series per se, but they love the story about the whales, or they love the story about the sea otters, and that's fine. And it's allowed me to almost reach into a couple of different genres. But the complexity of having that many episodes, that many characters, I'm definitely in the Post-it world. And when the new colors got introduced, I was ecstatic because I assign a color per character. And then I have, these sort of poster boards that can open up, and I start placing these, and the order can change, and it's just easy to rework. So it's kind of a pre-outline. But it's complicated. I'm finishing the 4th novel, the 4th of 5th. So certain things have now resolved. But there's still, as you both have said, a lot more story to tell. So I feel that I'm kind of working a jigsaw.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, once they came out with all those multicolors, it
Yeah.
just, I loved it. It was just
Yep.
same thing. I was using certain for the flashback portion were a certain color and then this. And so being visual, it was easy to use that on a wall or on my railing behind me and just have it all laid out.
yeah,
One place I lived, I had a pool table, and so I just had this pool table that just the top of it was just all these just note cards and color coordinated things. So in an instant, I could see I haven't seen this character in a while. And so, okay, I need to kind of figure out how to bring
yeah.
them back into the story
And I've got
because
a
I
whole lot
can
of
clearly
yellow over
see.
here, kind of clumped together. I need to sort of
Right.
spread things out. Yeah, we have a nice big dining table, which I was using for a while, but my husband found that to be objectionable. And I needed
You
a
spilled
way,
spaghetti sauce on one of the cards. That was the problem.
right? I needed a way to keep all that work intact but be able to put it away.
Mhm.
And so that's, I found, a good device for that.
Mm.
So, in science fiction, we are often dealing with the future.
Mm.
Would you say near future or far future is either more interesting or more difficult for either of you?
Oh, I'll jump into that one. I have found that I'm appreciative of anything that actually could happen, which is why I'm more Star Trek than Star Wars, why I'm more Tom Clancy than another fantasy writer like um, the guy who did Game of Thrones, whose name is
George
George
R. Martin. Yes.
George R. Martin. Right, exactly. Did he
Yeah,
take RR from J.R.R. Tolkien? Like, do you have to have two R's in the middle to be a
fantasy author.
fantasy author? Yeah, I find myself drawn to reality and to techno thrillers. The first book that really made me want to be a writer was Red Storm Rising. I think I might have mentioned that in the last one. And so my style tends to be more of a Clancy thing. And then I think, well, this could happen tomorrow, the next day, near future. So I really am intrigued by trying to stay within a realistic world where I can use future possibilities now. Because for me, to me, true science fiction to me is one, it's got to be based in science, and two, I want to watch how characters like you and me and others would react to this near future technology in a realistic way, not something that has been around forever, but something that they're discovering, like I'm discovering as I'm writing it. So that's what intrigues me about it.
Yeah, the plausible.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like I'm discovering it along with my characters as we go along. Yeah.
Now for your second novel and then the third, did they
Yep.
pick up right like 5 minutes after the first book ended, or did you skip?
It's such a good question. So, because the second book is basically a continuation of the first, and it could have been like a 1,200 page, epic, it picks up immediately, right? So we leave a cliffhanger at the end, and then the next one is just like the very next, whatever, hour later. But the second book concludes a lot. It really wraps up a lot of things. The third book takes place 800 years later. Now,
Whoa.
that's how it's pitched. That's the reality that people are living in in the beginning of the book. I'm not going to say whether that's the truth or not. You have to read it. It's coming out, I think, in 2025. So we'll find out. But it's a world long after the first two books have come and gone.
Yeah. Oh, how
Interesting.
intriguing.
Yeah, that's
why I like
a huge hop.
It's a huge hop. Yeah, that's why I like writing it.
Yeah.
So I ran into an unexpected spin-off, which it sounds like what happened to you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave, you got so many projects going. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened to you too. But I got approached about an idea and thought it would make sense, but it would have to take place 25 years after the current set of books is happening. And so talk about world building. Although that world certainly has been intact for a while, Now it was going to be the children of these characters. So, who did they marry? How did they make their money? Where do they live? Where were the kids educated? What did the careers look like as the young adults were getting started? I had to, figure all of that out. And I then had to look at the world. My story focuses quite a bit on environmental issues. I wrote as a journalist about environmental issues, much earlier in my career. So I had done that research, but now I had to say, well, where are we going to be in the very, very near future? And again, I'm dealing in what's plausible.
Yeah.
And there are, when you talk to venture capitalists and you see some of the most thrilling technologies that are coming, then if you have an optimistic view and you say, okay, that worked, suddenly there is a way to get rid of the plastic whorls in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. And we end up with a new technology. What are the challenges to it, and how is it implemented? I mean, it's really, it's fascinating. Of course, I can go down the rabbit hole with the research, and then I have to really say, okay, Pearl, you got enough research there. Now you got to write the chapter already.
Right.
But it's a sort of education unto itself, one that we all hope we can bring our readers along with us.
Right. So yours, you needed to keep it close enough because you had this whole world you already built, and so then you couldn't go necessarily 800 years in the future because you needed to kind of keep what you've built and then kind of leap forward into the future far enough for new technologies to exist.
Yes, I wanted my existing characters to still plausibly be alive and to be at a different chapter in their lives. So, in the current novel, there are 3 different couples getting married. Well, in that future book, they will have been married for a while or not. And so what do their personal lives look like? And they will have gained mastery in their careers. And so now, how do they speak about these things? It's interesting, and it has its own, kind of challenge that comes with a series, and we certainly see it in Star Trek. We saw Kirk, and then we see Picard, and then we see those who are inheriting the chair, and some of the protocols that were established are just golden, and there's an insistence, a demand to keep those in place. And then there are some things that have to shift with new technologies. So how many books do you think will be in your series, Dave?
Oh, just like with Steve, I didn't necessarily plan a set amount in the beginning. And actually the story that is going to be book 2 is the story that I had worked on the most all this time. But there was a character in there, kind of space pirate character, that just, like an earworm, he got in my head. I was like, where did he come from? And how did he get to be like this huge, force in this story? And so I just started working almost like a prequel on this other story. And so it just fleshed out that way, where this first book was fully finished and formed. The second, so there's a story already for the second book. And then I feel like, though, by the time I get to the end of book 2, that, obviously the trilogy thing is such a ingrained metric in our minds. So
it's wonderful.
so it feels like there would need to be some sort of a big concluding something for book 3. So I'll play with that. But originally it was the one story, and then it kind of popped into the 2 stories that, as Steve was talking, as you begin to write more details, it's like, all right, no, this is not this. This is a previous journey. And that's one of the reasons. So mine's set in the year 2561. So I needed to jump mine far enough into the future so that things could happen, exploration and colonies and all this kind of stuff could happen, where humanity had gone out to the ends of the world, and now they're kind of coming back together to collide in some crazy ways. But between book 1 and 2, I wanted like a 20-year gap, so that again, when they land in book 2, they have to catch up. The reader has to catch up with where they are. All right, 20 years has passed. What's happened? There's new people that are, that are born, that can now be in the academy, these new crop of 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds. Anything's possible. And where people are when I left them off in the old, there's going to be that catch up that they have to do, which I think hooks them into book 2. So I won't do the 800 years into that future, but for the first one, it's a good 500 years into the future, and then the second one is 20 years after that, just to give myself some time for new things to have happened. So
you're both wrestling with evolution,
right,
the personal evolution of characters and the
correct.
evolution of society.
Hmm.
For me, the reason I have 5 novels it's a pentology, is that I wanted the books, the titles, to come right out of the story.
Hmm.
And I have one of the most important characters is a journalist, and journalists ask 5 questions: who, what, when, where, why.
Mhm.
So each novel begins with one of those words, and then
Mm.
thematically, that's what's
Interesting.
going on in
I like that.
particular novel.
That's
Yeah.
neat.
So I wanted to talk for a minute about tech tools, things that you like, hacks that you might be willing to share. And also, of course, the all important question: is AI affecting your writing? Are you finding some interference from it? Are you finding some good, useful tools?
I think one of the things I've used in as recently as the last few months was it was a website called Quillbot, where I was able to, take paragraphs of what I've written, put it over there, and then it kind of goes through, and it's telling you some of those basic things, like this should be a comma, this should be a semicolon, this should be a
Mm.
hyphenate, and kind of some of those things, which we generally have used editors for. And I still hire the editor to do this big sweeping thing, but it enables me to dial things in on my own a little better than what I did before, and to have some more instant feedback on that end of it. So the Quillbot, so AI has helped there.
Mm.
ChatGPT, I don't use it so much for the writing of the book as much as I've used it for, hey, create me 3 different versions of the back of the book, the synopsis of the
Mhm.
story. I give them the 2-page synopsis that I've come up with, feed that into it, feed in information about Bravo Bay Books and about David Acuff. Said, all right, here, now write me a synopsis or a log line, write me or a tagline. Just give me that 5 words of something. And so it's really good about kind of creating those things and PR documents as far as news releases and things like that. So that's been very helpful to kind of have almost another fake person kind of thinking through some of the ancillary things on the back end. But
You have to be careful about accuracy, I will say.
oh, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah. If it
AI
starts
wrote a
telling me that I
bio.
went to Harvard or Yale or something, I'm like,
That's
actually,
right. Yeah, AI
yeah.
wrote a bio about me that turned out to be a combination of my father and me. So he did go to Yale Drama School and I didn't. And, so you got to just vet these documents. What do you think,
Yeah.
Steve?
Well, you don't want to think of AI as a lie, right? And
Right.
I have 2 things about AI that I do not fear. 1, it taking us over, and 2, it taking over writing. Because I have found, I've worked with ChatGPT a lot in my daily work that I do as a trainer and as a coach and as organizational development trainer. It's so helpful in organizing a seminar I might want to lead. Hey, I'm going to be leading 50 people in a disc seminar. I need 3 games based on disc. Okay, here they are. Boom, perfect. Right. It's a very good assistant. And also it did write my synopsis of my second book. I have tried, and I would never use AI to write anything, but I have tried to see what it would write if I put stuff in. So I put a chapter and an outline into AI, and I said, how would you write the next chapter? Here's what the chapter needs to be about. Here's what it needs to resolve, and all of that. And it was so trying to think of the word. It had no creativity. It didn't know what it was writing. And then I prompted it deeper. It still didn't know what to write, and I kept prompting it, and I felt really good about that because it didn't. It made me realize AI is not, at least not now. It's not going to take over the writing. And even if someone who was a writer said, "Okay, here's the entire outline. Write this book for me." If it wrote a really bad book, which I think it would, and that writer thought that that book was good, then the writer is still representing their own style and what they think is good, and they would have written that anyway, just with more effort. And so I don't use AI to help me write. I don't. I hope I never do. That's the whole point of me writing, is to get out of my head onto paper. And a larger thing about AI, a lot of people are still talking about, is it going to be a threat to us in the future? And I think, the only way it can be is because someone is misusing it. I don't see AI turning on us. I see people using AI to gain advantage and to make a lot of money, because any new industry is going to be co-opted by people who are greedy and people who see advantage in new technologies. And so my entire first book, The Deletion, is about AI not taking us over, but killing itself for our own benefit, to teach us a lesson, to say, stop this, you guys. I'm gonna shut down all communications and teach you people how to get your act
Oh, your
together.
book, yeah. I mean, it was fascinating premise. Really very interesting idea.
Thanks. David read the first chapter on his YouTube channel.
That's right.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah, yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Yeah,
that was just a lovely thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah, it was really.
and Mars is on deck, and I've got 3 other authors that I didn't know previously that now they've said, hey, could you read my first chapter? So got 3 more books for that, and just as a way to introduce audiences to
Great.
Oh, it's
new
fabulous.
authors and
Yeah.
stuff. It's just kind of and we all also want to be able to give back, and to be able to support the people that are so important to us. And so that that all that kind of stuff was just like fun for me to build. Right now the views aren't there, but eventually I hope it's one of those things where people can just come in and kind of surf through and hear,
It
pick
was a
an author.
fabulous
And
idea.
so
Really. Well, so
That's
speaking
nice.
of audio, I know all of us have audios, or have put out audios of our books. Um, I know for me, if there's a nonfiction book, I feel it's really great for the author to read that book himself or herself.
Mm-hmm.
They've spent, they're the authority on the subject. They'll have the right emphasis and understanding of it. But when it comes to a work of fiction, I believe it needs to be performed,
Yeah.
by either one or more people who are trained as performers, who can in
Yeah.
fact deliver that sense of character, change their voices and so forth. Because without that, I personally get lost in the story. I can't tell who's speaking. So you have thoughts about that?
I like having the multiple voices represented in a lot of my stuff. I've got the one for historians proper, and so I'd done the main voiceover for the narration myself, and then brought in a bunch of other people to kind of, especially females, to kind of to read the female parts and to have those. And
And I got to do a couple of those parts.
yes,
Oh, it was really
exactly.
fun.
So yeah,
Love those characters.
and so it's fun, and it provides a spark as they're listening, as the reader is listening to this, a new voice kind of piques your interest as well too, instead of
Yes.
having just this voice, kind of going
Yeah.
on and on and on. So I like that kind of premise, and so I'm a huge fan of the multiple voice, and because it's science fiction, I was adding in a bunch of sound effects and
Mhm.
like little music cues. So it was almost like one of your radio dramas, Mara. So I think I was kind of pulling more from the radio drama world instead of from the audiobook kind of read world. And
Right,
so,
me too. I learned so much from producing a radio
mhm,
drama, which is
mhm,
fully articulated.
mhm,
Every door closed, every footstep,
Yeah,
every piece
right.
of paper rattling and all that. And I love that. And so what
right.
I created was sort of a hybrid.
Mm,
So I had you, Dave,
mhm,
and a number of terrific actors join me in creating the audios, and we would choose which sounds to articulate.
mm,
We didn't do it as a full-on drama, but it's a satisfying listen,
mm,
and I'm satisfied that the audience always knows who's speaking and essentially where they are. You know, they can visualize, okay, we're outside, we're inside,
mm,
and they can see what's going on. The point is to serve the reader, serve the listener, so
Hmm.
that they're just engaged and involved in the story. I thought what you did recently, Dave, was really interesting, where you added visuals
mm.
to one of your audios. I don't know if you've seen that, Steve. It must have taken so many hours, I can hardly
It,
imagine, but it
it
was very interesting.
It does take a minute. And again, because it was the finished audiobook product was 90 minutes long because it was a short story that I kind of novelized. So it was it was a good practice. I don't know that I could do that if it's a 30-hour,
Oh,
if
Yeah,
it's a if it's a
no,
30-hour book.
just shoot
I
the
don't,
movie, you know.
yeah, yeah.
yeah, right. Make
But
the-
for this, yeah, I was going to MidJourney AI to prompt some different artwork based on my characters and my locations and different things like that. And then just, doing it for a future sci-fi hospital and doing it for a future sci-fi in their inside their web, their matrix kind of thing. So pulling together just 100, 200 images. And then, but part of that was because I wasn't experiencing a lot of sales on Audible. So if it was doing fine on its own on Audible, I would have just left it alone. But because there was nothing really happening, I was like, well, maybe if I put images, since it's a sci-fi story, break it up into the 6 chapters and release it on YouTube for free, just as this serial of a fun story with some of these stills that just kind of dissolve from one to the next, or as people are talking, going from a close up to a close up, and just giving a smidge. It creates a different kind of a world and a feel, and just very easy. It's something I could never have done 2 years ago,
Mhm.
maybe not even a year ago, but because of the technology today, I was able to very quickly, get a bunch of pictures and
Yeah,
that related to my story and make this thing happen. So yeah, so it's
Well,
been interesting.
a more rudimentary tool that authors have been using for a while is a book trailer,
Yes.
and I think they're really great. You
Mm.
know, I mean,
I tried to make my own, and I got a lukewarm response from one David Acuff. But I think the response was this: "Hey, man, let me do it for you," which was a polite way of saying, "Yeah, maybe this isn't your thing."
No, there's so many little things. It's like, oh, let me just punch this up. Let
Yeah,
me, it's like,
yeah.
can I touch it, please? Can I just
uh,
rearrange?
so
I
so
said, I said, make it for me. I don't know. I'm still wait. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I'm still waiting. You're busy.
well, full disclosure, he watched one of mine and he said the same. It's like, can I work on that
Yeah.
a little bit? And of course, he made it so much better. What
No.
we live in this world of short attention span, and the question is, what's your book about? And I
Mhm,
Yeah.
love being able to say, in 3 minutes, I can show you.
mhm,
And I love that
Good
that's
point.
an option. You
mhm,
know, I find myself at book signings, you have to answer that question. And
mhm,
Yeah.
you have, again, people are in a bit, the other authors, other tables, other books they want to look at and all that. And so trying to boil it down to something that will be of interest to them.
mhm.
It's all part of the marketing of our books. I mean,
That's
so
where I struggle, is the marketing part. And talk about tools. I think I am eventually going to get an AI marketing um, bot or something to help me. There's a couple out there on the market, because the one thing I struggle with is explaining my own book, because it's kind of, there's a lot to it. I once wrote a script about years ago when I was writing spec scripts about the cloning technology finally getting to the point where you can clone a human, and the World Cloning Society says, listen, we're not just going to clone anyone, we're going to have the world vote, and based on the vote, that's the human that we're going to bring back. And people picking all sorts of people like Einstein and Carrot Top and all these. It's a comedy, by the way. And I say all that to say that the person that is overwhelmingly chosen is Elvis. And the whole movie is about this new young Elvis who does not want to be a star. Anyway, I say all that to say this, being able to explain that, the way I was able to market that script was to say, if you could clone someone and bring them back, anyone, who would it be? And that's how the conversation gets going. But I don't know how to do that with my AI-based crowd wisdom book, other than saying, do you fear AI or not? I guess I could start with that. But I always find provocative questions are a great way to start.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Well, generally, how are readers finding you now?
Well, my address is listed on the front of my house. They just
Got a
drive
lot of
by and throw
stalkers.
they're not. I mean, I worked with Paper Raven Books for my first 2 books, and they were in charge of my marketing. But I found that to be Amazon based. And what I needed to do was just do my own stuff on Instagram, which is where I have a presence. And for a while, I was trying to get people to come to my Instagram account. Now I'm trying to push people to my website, stevetruitt.com, where you can, learn all about me and buy my book there. But I also was told, and I can't remember who said this to me, that most people will really start to take you seriously and get into your stuff when your trilogy is done, when they can, plow through your entire set of works. The first book came out and it was 1 of 3, so it's like, okay. So once I have that under my belt, I think that's when I'm going to employ the marketing strategy and really get going.
That sounds like a good idea. I find there is a needed trustworthiness. A reader wants to know, well, he says he's going to write 2 more books, but is he really?
Yeah,
And
right.
so that's what the trilogy, all 3 being published, then they know they can sit down and they can binge read if they want to, and it's going to be there for them.
Yeah.
But I also think, well, it's a tough problem to solve. Marketing a book in an era when arguably people don't read as much.
Yeah.
But within genres, it is lively. And sci-fi is one of the genres that is just sparkling and bubbling along.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think being in the sci-fi community, I personally believe very much in synergy marketing rather than, I mean, competition is just not particularly useful or relevant.
Yeah.
Because somebody who loves sci-fi, what are they looking for? They're looking for their next sci-fi.
Right.
So
Good
if
story.
you're right there in that community and you're in those conversations, some of which are in person and some of which are online, you're findable.
Yeah.
So I think that's exciting. So David suggested we could share some of our top 5s, which sounded like a fun sort of game. So top 5 sci-fi TV shows.
And I gotta say, these are impossible lists.
Yeah.
Because
They're hard.
trying to, especially the movie one, sci-fi movies, but the impossibleness of just limited to 5, especially when you start looking at all the other ones you leave out. But as far as particular ones that have meant a lot to me, I wrote down some of them. But the latest Battlestar Galactica,
Yes.
whenever it came out, I don't know what year that came out, but it was
2004.
like
Ronald D. Moore.
Yeah, that one
Ron
was
Moore is something else, isn't he?
that
Fantastic
was
producer.
that was
Yeah.
a fantastic one. As far as all the Star Treks, I think the Next Generation was kind of my when I kind of came into it the most and kind of enjoyed that. Firefly
Yeah.
kind of combined the
Yep.
humor with with that Han Solo kind of character. This
Yeah.
hey, let's go misbehave.
Yeah.
uh, I've really enjoyed The Expanse as a series because they had some really cool ships, first of all, and then kind of the world building that they did. And then my last one I had on the list was Altered Carbon, which was more recently on Netflix, just because
Mm.
they were dealing with some of that same, you kind of your soul lives in this disc that you can put into different shells, and then they kind of operate in these different worlds. And so it just kind of was a cool, very visual thing. But again, it leaves out way too many.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a snob. I'll start with Star Trek, and obviously Next Generation was great, but I watched the original
Yep.
series when I was a child. I loved it. I've loved Star Trek as long as I could remember. But Battlestar Galactica 2004 to me is probably, next to Breaking Bad, the best television show ever produced, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Firefly is in the top 5, maybe not number 3. But Lost is a big show that I just absolutely loved, which is science fiction. They definitely messed up the end, for sure, I think. But I find Lost to be a fantastic journey to go on. And then I don't know if I have another one to pick. Um, I'm really picky. I'll give just about anything a shot. And if I feel like the writing is weak or I don't like the premise, I tend to back away from it a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to give you my top 4. There's my top 4. I can't think of another one.
For me, I'm sure the top 5 are probably all Star Trek.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned last time, I love the fact that starting with the original series, the idea was to think your way out of a problem rather than fight your way out of a problem.
Mm.
And so it could be a trek and not wars. I haven't enjoyed Star Trek as much when it has veered into more of the weaponry and war and so forth. I find it just intriguing to really push the envelope with technologies, strategies, understanding personality, just thinking your way out of
Yeah.
things. Star Trek 3 was my movie, and I really enjoyed the search for Spock. That sense of all is not lost. Just when you think it is, there's a new way of thinking. In that case, it was the Genesis planet, but I enjoy that. There are some Interstellar was a movie that really sort of grabbed me by the throat. It beginning with, I don't know if you recall this, but there's a bookshelf on which is a tiny model of the shuttle. And at this point in the story, we're living in a world where there's a PR campaign that says there never was a space program, there never was a NASA. And that's incomprehensible or unimaginable, or it used to be. Now fake news has gotten so adept that I suppose it might be possible, and that's really, really scary to me. So that, and the fact that they used actual footage from the Dust Bowl when crops wouldn't grow, and the fact that the urgency of actually finding another place for humankind to live. There are people who, oddly enough, including Elon Musk, whom at this moment I do not admire, but he wanted to start SpaceX because this was his worry. He thought, we got to have a place to go and a way to get there. If there is a health crisis globally, well, we had one of those. If there were a climate collapse globally. So there are a number of threats facing humanity, and how clever, how smart, how brave will we be? And my thought about authors is we sort of throw ourselves out there into the realm of possibility, and then we report back what
Yeah.
we've seen.
Yeah.
What did it look like to live 1,000 years ago? Here you go. What will it look like to live 1,000 years from now? Here you go. And that's our job,
Mhm.
Mhm.
So, Dave, you mentioned Marvel and DC. I'm really not an expert. Do you consider this to be sci-fi, or is it fantasy, or
Well,
crossover?
and I mean, technically it is sci-fi, but on my top sci-fi movies, like I didn't include any Marvel, DC. I didn't include any of like the comic book movies.
Mhm.
That's almost, again, talk about your impossible lists, but it's like my top sci-fi movies were, the slots were Star Wars: A New Hope, Blade Runner, Aliens 2, Terminator 2, and
Yes, yes.
Back to the Future. So, you have all those, and yes, there was, Guardians of the Galaxy is amazing, and the Infinity Wars was just an incredible culmination of
Yeah.
10 years of films.
Yeah.
So they were powerful, and Spider-Man's my guy. So, but again, as far as when I'm thinking in terms of sci-fi films, I don't usually, it's got to be different than like the comic book world, because as well as like I don't, there's a whole nother list that's like anime world, like animation and anime and all the Japanese stuff and some of the things out there. That's a whole another
Yeah.
sci-fi list. But for my strictly, top sci-fi, it's a lot of those, from a lot of James Cameron up there with Aliens 2 and Terminator 2. There's
Aliens 2 was extraordinary. It's an extraordinary movie. I do have another TV show I want to add. Do you remember Heroes?
oh yeah,
Back,
yeah,
the
yeah,
first season
yeah,
was extraordinary,
yeah,
just
yep.
perfect. I think they really lost their way. The showrunner took off and didn't run the show, and but for movies too, I would say, because this tells us a lot about our different styles, David.
Mhm.
I like to stay as close to real as possible. So Inception to me was a fascinating
Me
sci-fi
too.
movie.
Yes,
Going
very.
deep into the mind, the levels of dreams, something that maybe you could do. I mean, the way Christopher Nolan didn't even spend 1 second on how do they attach themselves to these things. It didn't
Right.
matter. Right? They're going into, but I just find Inception, it took over Contact, which was based on the book by Carl Sagan, starring Jodie Foster, which was my favorite movie forever. Inception kind of edged it out a little bit for me. And I think Contact is based on so much realism. A
Oh yeah,
signal could emanate from
Contact was a
space.
fabulous movie and book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. The
but
book
then
was
I think
so different.
we have to mention The Matrix,
Yeah.
because of the idea that you're not in reality, reality's
Yeah.
you, which Inception is playing with.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Elon, go back to Elon. Elon said, if you could ask aliens or the creator one question, what would it be? And his answer is, what's behind the simulation? He believes we're living in a simulation, which is probably why he's so fast and loose with being a bit of a freak these days. When he's doing Neuralink, trying to grab the brain, here's what he's trying to do. I'm just telling you this now. He wants to preserve his own consciousness and live forever. That's what he's trying to do. And so going to space is one thing. And yes, I get all of that. He wants us to be a multiplanetary species. But I think ideally what he'd like to do is preserve his own consciousness, upload it to Starlink or whatever, or put it on a spaceship and send it off to a place where he could just live forever. That's my thought.
Which is fine.
Very
We could be the
brilliant.
beneficiary of all these different advances because of whatever his end game
If
is.
he lets you,
That's
if he
great.
lets you, if he lets you be the beneficiary. The thing that's interesting about him is that with Starlink, for instance, he's got 6,500 satellites
Mhm.
orbiting the Earth. At any moment, if he wants, he could turn off every Tesla. He's got a lot of power and a lot of control. Now, he doesn't use it yet, but, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, what's he really trying to do? But he does have a lot of power.
So to switch gears a little bit, who would you say are some of your mentors?
I have a succession. Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, Carl Sagan was Neil deGrasse Tyson's mentor too.
Yes.
And I just find that succession of that type of thought, how insignificant we are, and therefore how precious we are, I find to be just so important. And I think anybody that stops for a second and says, we're living on a tiny ball of dust in the middle of nowhere. How dare you think you're better than anybody else? How dare you think you're less than anyone else? Like, let's all just be amazed at the fact that we have consciousness and that we're somehow the ones that got to be here and experience it. So anybody who dives into that kind of thinking, I find fascinating. I love Sagan. I've got a ton of his books here, and I've got Neil's books too, and they really amaze me. To that end, the other person I would pick is Michael J. Fox. If you've read his books, and if you haven't, you should. He's written 3 books about his journey with Parkinson's. And I don't think I've ever read more inspiring, beautiful books, honestly.
Oh, wow. Well, I agree with you about Carl Sagan, and I have a dear friend named Lawrence Doyle who is on the SETI team.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of sitting with Lawrence and Carl at Jet Propulsion Lab during the Voyager mission. And it's one of those things, while I was in the room with them, I had the illusion that I understood everything they were saying. But they were hypothesizing as to why one of the rings of Saturn is braided. And so they were both putting forth ideas at the time. And just to talk about altitude of thought, just to see that even on the frontier of thought, what got them both there, aside from both of them are certainly geniuses, but it's curiosity.
Sure.
And wonder.
Right.
A sense of, both of them. Lawrence is one of the funniest people I've ever known. And he is someone who can put in everyday terms, like, imagine a grapefruit over here and an orange over here, and that's Jupiter, and suddenly you can see something that you can't see when it's expressed in multiple zeros. And Lawrence is so fascinating to me that I have a character based on him, an astronomer. So Lawrence has been my collaborator for years in creating moments of things that Cornelius, my character, would be thinking about or working on. And so it's really fun. He enjoys it, he says, because I ask him questions that don't come up in the normal course of his work, where he's not involved so much with humanity. He's involved with finding planets and doing calculations. And so I bring him down to, terra firma in a different way. We were standing on the sidewalk in Cambria years ago. He is from Cambria, by the way. And I who know about 3 constellations, I said, "Where's Cassiopeia?" And he pointed downward. And I said, "Oh, so meaning he's living on a round planet, right? Whereas I'm living on a flat Earth." It was just one of those fantastic moments. So in fairness, I have to say that Lawrence is also a mentor for me.
By the way, the reason that ring, it's the F ring, is braided is because there's 2 moons that are within that ring on the outside, and they jostle around each other.
That's right.
While they go through the ring, and that's what's braided the.
That's right, exactly.
That's awesome.
And so to be there at the moment when they were figuring that out.
Yeah, that must have been mind-blowing.
Fantastic. Yeah. Very, very awesome.
Now, as far as writing mentors,
Mhm.
I have to mention this one lady. Her name's Mara Purl. I don't know if you
Oh.
guys have heard of her, but she
Yeah.
knows so many things and so many people. And when I had first moved to LA, and got in touch with her through Patty's Diner, just eating at the same restaurant, just happened to
Wow.
be,
Yep.
and through Bill, eating there and just being a regular at a restaurant, kind of built, this long-term relationship where, she herself has been an open book. Haha. As far as processes and things that work, things that don't work, and kind of, so that's been fun to have, that kind
Thank
of,
you,
because
Dave. That's very kind.
yeah, you're welcome. And because any other of the mentors, if you have like Stephen King, who's doing this work out there, and he has a great on writing book that I've now gone through twice on audiobook and trying to take notes mentally as I'm running around a track. But so he's got a lot of so many insightful things about the writing process and the journey, which is great. So he could be considered one. But as far as, I can't talk to him and get feedback and things like that on a regular basis, but so Mara has been a fantastic sounding board, and just helping me go from baby writer to
Yeah.
gaining my sea legs.
At lightning speed, I would say
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Both of you, have just, you obviously have both had very interesting previous chapters in your careers, but the way you have used your intelligence, your experiences, and discovered this raw talent and then really responded to it. I mean, all of us have gotten that, that tap on the shoulder that says you're supposed to write something.
Yeah.
But you've really responded and embraced, and I love that, because I think authors do very important work.
Thank you. There was a movie which I'm sure you've both seen and love, Throw Mama from the Train. And it's one of my favorite comedies. That's in my top 5 comedies. And it opens with Billy Crystal trying to write this novel, The Night Was, and he kept getting stuck on the night was. And he's going around, the night was, the night was. But he says he's also a writing teacher, and what he says in his class is, a writer writes always. And here he is struggling. I find that not just a funny movie, but a really well crafted movie. Same guys who wrote City Slickers, which is my top comedy ever.
Okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
good.
When we're talking about mentors, I have to mention Louis L'Amour. He, he wrote 100 books.
Unbelievable.
And the research that he did. I mean, if he says there's a water hole, either he went there or he talked to the guy who did.
No.
So it was talk about reality based and authentic. And I knew Louis close to the end of his life and had many, many wonderful conversations with him, which were such a blessing. And then I had this feeling that I should call him. And his wife said he wants to see you. And when I got there, it was clear he had lost a lot of weight and he might not be with us much longer. And he gave me a kind of oral exam. How many hours a day are you writing? How many characters are you focusing on? Tell me about the setting for your series, and so forth and so on. And I answered everything. And then he said, now, don't give up. Don't stop. You have found your niche. Don't ever walk away from it. And he said it so forcefully. And so when things have been difficult, boy, he's right there in my head saying that again. I'm so grateful. He never promised it would be easy.
Yeah.
And it ain't.
Right.
No, it's not.
But if it's our thing, it's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and I had wanted, because I was working at Disney for those 7 years, and then started building the book writing on the side starting in 2019. And so I had wanted, I think whenever 7,000 of us were let go last year, I'd kind of hoped for 3 more years with Disney to be able to be working full time and be
Yeah.
growing this thing on the
Yes,
side,
of course.
because I had like a 10-year goal. So 2019 to 2029, where it was all about that. It's not making money off of this stuff. It's growing your audience and developing the relationship with other authors. And just, it's like this 10-year plan just to build the base and then to kind of expand from there. But just knowing how long it takes just to build an audience, to connect with people on through social media and just all these things, it is a long, tough road, just even to make a little splash, not to
Yeah.
mention to
I'm
do huge.
like you, David. I'm 2 years into my 6-year plan. I
Mhm.
probably should have set my goal at 10 years. But even Elon Musk says, if you give yourself 30 days, it'll take 30 days. If you give yourself 3 hours, it'll take 3 hours.
No,
So I
that's
gave myself 6 years,
mhm.
and that's while I'm working. But yeah, and that's what I've learned is I'm really glad I was realistic about that, because it takes so long to find your readers or them to find you.
I listened to the video of a wonderful author who's in my genre in women's fiction named Robyn Carr. And she described being at a conference and someone said, "How did you do it? How did you get on the New York Times bestseller list?" And Robyn said, I sold my first book in 1978 and I made the bestseller list in 2008. And she said, I realized that for this person, I would not be a beacon of hope.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And but now Robyn Carr has a series called Virgin River that's doing very well on the air. And then she has another series called Sullivan's Crossing that's doing very well on the air. And, for my money, she deserves every bit of it. Nor could her stories have the breadth, the pacing, the scope, the character development, and all of that they have had she not been on this incredible journey and been that devoted and that convinced that she had something to share. I'm not saying it has to take 30 years.
Right.
Right.
But it isn't about the quantity of time.
Right.
We're kind of mining something, and we're deep in the mine, and there is gold. And it takes what it takes to get that gold out. And that's what we're doing.
Some of these big filmmakers, they'll talk about when they ask advice, how to become a big filmmaker like them, and asked by like 19, 20-year-olds, he's like, first of all, forget filmmaking for 20 years. Go out and live and experience and do and be, and then come back to it. And then as a 40-year-old, you're going to have, like you said, things to say, an insight and ways to be able to put the thoughts onto the page that you never had before. And I appreciated that as kind of getting into this at 45 years old, 46 years old. And some of the stories that I started when I was in 18, 19, that I had in a box in a corner, some of those I revisited as like this, and was able to do wonderful things with them because of they're much different stories now, I guarantee you, than they were 30 years before when I started tinkering with
them. But the nuggets were there.
Yeah, there were some good nuggets that I still wanted to, but the dynamics of the relationships and the authenticity of each character, so that they all didn't sound like this 18-year-old kid wrote, this,
right.
this 50-year-old woman wrote this 20-year-old, urban kid, so it was just, so I appreciate growth and the amount of time it's taken to get to this point. So now it may take 10 years instead of 30 years, which I'm hoping for. But again, I don't count the that learning curve of the last 50 years. I've been noodling around the planet.
We needed it. We needed those experiences to be who we are.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, gentlemen, as always, It's so interesting to talk with you, and I love sharing our thoughts and ideas.
Mhm.
And you know that I wish each of you the very best with your fantastic books. I want to
Thank you.
tune in again and hear what's going on in book 3, Steve.
Thank you.
What's going on in book 2, and who knows what else, Dave.
Exactly. Mhm. For sure.
Great.
And Mara,
you
thank you
so
so much for featuring us, and you're fantastic. We both really love you.
Well, I love you both. All right. See you next time.